Video conferencing is something that we're looking to implement very soon. We've done some of it already, and it's a really good way to have a more day-to-day interaction, put a face to the name, and really understand who you're working with on any given moment. Skype is obviously a very pervasive and an extremely valuable tool, again for the video conferencing even, but even for just audio. It's extremely fast, and it's excuse me, readily available. You can just quickly phone anybody you want. Those two things are extremely valuable. Neither of those really replaces on-site visits, though. There is nothing as valuable as a face-to-face interaction, and excuse me, especially when you think about kicking off a large release. The energy that's conveyed in a face-to-face, the information, the immediacy of the dialogue and the back and forth, all of those things, again, it can't be replaced with video conferencing or audio calls or any of the other communication channels. So we'll take a look at the team structure. You'll notice that they're fairly similar across the two locations. I'll go through them and then I'll talk about the similarities. So the local team, obviously senior management, and then project managers in place, resource management, architects, and QA. On the remote team, a similar structure, a little bit different though. Senior management, project management, architects, developers, and QA. And at first glance, you might look at that and say, why the redundancy? And the key there is at the bottom here. The local team is staffed at about 30 to 50% of the ratio of the remote staff, which is a very favorable ratio when you consider the cost savings of outsourcing. You'll also notice that there are a couple of other differences: a resource manager on the local team and development on the remote. So it's an important piece of the puzzle to have the team structure in place and have a balance across the two locations. And again, the communication piece, the ability to communicate frequently, openly, and bidirectionally being absolutely critical. And the team structure set up to facilitate that. And then also, obviously, a pervasive goal across the entire thing, which is full transparency. And again, the work stream ratios. Local is the green team. Is the green color, sorry, and blue being the remote teams. We have 4 teams highlighted here. It's not the extent of the teams that we have in place, but it's to illustrate the ratios. Again, it's probably a 3-to-1 ratio in the local, the remote to local teams, which is a pretty favorable ratio. Governance, I spoke about this a little bit earlier. Definitely a very important piece to have in place. Everybody across locations needs to have a very clear understanding of who's doing what, when, why, and how. And the governance is really there. I'm a pretty big believer in process being there to serve us. We don't serve it. So enough process to make it efficient. Everybody knows what's going on and how it's going to work, but no more process than that. So it's not overhead. So going over the governance that we put in place, again, this was part of our own evolution to make ourselves as efficient as possible. So making sure we had a very clear 1 to 3 year roadmap. What is it that we're shooting for? What is the strategy behind our direction? Cycling down into there at a little more granularity, a 2 to 3 month build cycle. We need to revise our release life cycle, our release process. How does that whole thing work? The feature life cycle, and I'll go into that in a little more detail in the next slide. Priority update life cycle. So inevitably, we're going to need to address things in our production environment and have them done immediately instead of in the next build cycle. RCA process. Again, as much as we want to avoid it, things will happen in production and they need the priority update to fix them. And we need to do a root cause analysis on those things in order to understand what happened and how we're going to avoid that going forward. And a process needs to be put in place around that. And then central tracking and reporting, of course. This is a little bit hard to see. I'll work through just one of these processes that we put in place. And it's really to illustrate that the process is set up. And although we do identify what happens locally and what happens remotely, for the most part, it's a process that the entire team across locations follows from start to finish. So, and the idea here is that it's very seamless. Again, it's an extension of the team and not an appendage of it. So if you look at product in general, items come into the product funnel where we define and work against the roadmap, and they come in from multiple locations. The first piece is to vet those items. Are they really the right thing for us to be working on right now? Immediately following that is we do some team assignment locally for somebody to drive and own this particular piece. And then we go right into business requirements. Following that is an approval process for those business requirements. And I'll talk about where we track and report against these processes in a few minutes. So after the BRD is a tech spec, and again, approval on the tech spec. Once we cycle through that and the tech spec is what we need it to be, we head into dev and QA, and that cycles until we get certification on the particular feature. We do code review and then UAT, and then when everything is set and meets the BRD requirements, we push it out to production. Now, this does skip one piece, which is every build has multiple features. So once a feature is certified and ready to go, it has to sit adjacent to multiple other features, and a regression test across the entire suite has to be done. So it gives you a sense for the kind of structure and process that we put in place. This is obviously just one small piece of it, but it's important to touch on that because of the critical nature of it. And again, all that process is driven through a central track and reporting mechanism. A very, very critical piece as well. Everybody has to be able to be dealing with a single source of truth and understanding where everybody's at in the cycle, how many features we have, how many team members are working on it, when they're going to be done, et cetera. So to summarize the benefits of outsourcing, just after working through some of that information, certainly you can see from the engagements that are at hand, there's versatility. So we have a complex development across multiple applications going on simultaneously. We also have a tier 1 24/7 support team, quite versatile just in those two things alone. And we also span into IT. IT is a pretty big, outsourcing IT is a pretty big part of our strategy. The cost savings, it's approximately a 2-to-1 ratio per FTE, which is, when you look at scaling, you have to take that savings very significantly, very seriously, I should say. It's pretty significant. The ability to scale up and scale down quickly. Now, with a large team comes the ability to be able to cross-pollinate quickly, which is important, especially when you get into the rapid pace of client solutions work. You really need to be able to respond to the demand that's coming in and not leave any business on the table. And in order to do that in a cost-effective way, you need to be able to scale up and scale down very effectively. And again, that large team and the cross-pollination that comes with that, or the ability to cross-pollinate, being very, very important. And then, by nature of it being a partnership and not a vendor, it's also fairly strategic in nature. Take for me being here, for example, I probably wouldn't be here in Holland doing this if I didn't have a global outsourcing partner that was on a strategic level working with us day in and day out. So I wanted to also talk a little bit about our particular roadmap. And again, the relevance here is I'll talk about where we're headed. And there's some interesting things in that alone, just because of the nature of the company and the strategic direction that we're headed in. But then also there's a lot of breadth of functionality, and there's also a lot of complexity and depth. And again, it's important to note that when considering the outsourcing engagement in general. So EMS, again, we're an email marketing system, so you can see where the acronym comes from. Any given email marketing campaign follows, on a macro level at least, a very similar life cycle. You've got data coming in, often from a CRM system externally. Excuse me. And then you have a couple of applications. We have an on-demand and an automated application suite. Once the data is at hand and you're working within the application, the next step is to design your program. So what kind of marketing initiative are you engaged into? Is it acquisition? Is it retention? Is it loyalty? So designing the program and set up to achieve your goals. And then inevitably a collaboration step down at the bottom. So once you design your program, you have to author the content for that, and that's going to entail pulling in multiple people from multiple divisions of the organization, and collaborating on the generation of that content. And then the deployment phase, and that is typically out through email. And then there's also a web component too, to track activity for subsequent activity after an email deployment has gone out. And probably one of the most pivotal pieces of the puzzle being reporting. Setting up your program, deploying into the market is reasonably, well, it's complex on its own. It's probably, that whole piece of the puzzle is probably only half the equation. All of that means very little if you can't understand what's happening after that happens. It's really what allows you to close the cycle and govern what you're going to do next in order to continue the conversation with the recipients. And the last piece of the puzzle being an enterprise data export. Inevitably, people want to take that data from the reporting infrastructure and pull it back into their systems to do more proprietary analysis on it. So next I'll talk about where we're headed. So that's today's system. As you can see, tomorrow's EMS is quite a bit more colorful, and therefore must be quite a bit better. The paradigm is the same. There's three fundamental changes here, though. On a macro level, again, the steps are the same. There's 6 macro level steps involved. But the real changes here are productization. Instead of custom solutions, to achieve that breadth of functionality, productize that whole thing. And then also feature control. So if you look at the old EMS, the old system, the feature control functionality allows for people to just pay for what they want and nothing more, which is an upside. But feature control with productization allows the flexibility along with the benefits of the SaaS platform. And self-serve. Now, the difference between productization and self-serve being productization could be, for example, used by our in-house team. But we want to take that extra step and make it available to the end user as well, so that they can engage into their marketing initiatives and craft them up as quickly as possible. So the 6 steps here, I'll get into a little more detail on each one of those as we go through it. Again, the ETL API piece of it, this is fairly intuitive. Okay. I think I just had the bell rung on me, so I'll speed up a little bit. ETL API, again, data needs to come in and needs to come from any source and in any format. Looking at the program piece of it, again, you want self-serve, a drag-and-drop interface, and to plan and design your sophisticated engagements. This just being a conceptual representation of the drag-and-drop interface with a toolbox on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, your canvas, where you're going to design this deployment. So I'll kind of outline a quick program that you might engage into. One is you might segment right out of the gate. So I want to talk differently to people who have had activity in the last 7 days versus the last 60 versus the last 90. Then you might set up 2 more channels for your program. One is into social on top. Social is a great avenue, a great channel for acquisition. So again, this being part of your program, set it up to go into social to acquire new contacts. And the third piece being the mobile piece. So you would want to do probably an A/B split test across mobile, across iPhone, and across BlackBerry, understanding which one is the most fruitful. And the collaboration piece, this is really what we talked about before, only in a productized self-serve feature control mechanism, to be able to facilitate role-based security, approvals at each stage, and full team engagement. And an example of that collaborative ability is taking this program that we just talked about and drilling down into one of the email buckets. You would then have the ability to customize your template, and govern for each section within the template who is going to author and who's going to approve. Again, a very quick and easy way to collaborate across the entire team. And the deployment, some strategic changes here. So not only deploying to multiple channels of email and web, but then also to mobile and social, and multiple channels, multiple avenues within each of those channels. And I'm going to touch on this just very quickly, but it's a very, very significant paradigm change, and quite a complex one to do well. And again, the importance of the reporting piece. The changes here, it should be graphical, it should be executive, and it should be push and pull. So it's quite a significant change on that front as well. And this is just an example of one of the reports, an email trend with open versus clicks over time, and the ability to very quickly understand exactly what's happening. Again, a summarized graphical view of it, but then also be able to click and start to get more information around what's happening and drill down straight into details from there. So the breadth of functionality being both summary and detail, intuitive, and having that being pushed out to you instead of going and pulling it from the UI. And the last piece of the puzzle being the enterprise data export. And again, this is just the inverse of the ETL component, really. ETL being the ability to bring data in very quickly, and the export being the ability to send it out very quickly. Now, this is our timeline, and I'll skip over this just because of time constraints. But this is outlining on the left, just quickly, the 6 macro level areas of the model. The chronology over time over the next fiscal year, and then a couple of generic buckets here for infrastructure and general application improvements. So in summary, if you look at the roadmap ahead and even the engagement that we're involved in right now, there's quite a significant breadth of functionality and depth there. It's mission critical, and it's very, very complex. 1.8 billion messages per year requires some full-time attention, I'll say that. So the summary again of the value there, versatility right across the board, cost savings and scaling, and also the breadth of contact with a global strategic partner. So pretty significant, and one of the things that we're considering doing is expanding into the European market as well. To start to tap into that market and start to offer some of those services on a more global basis. I will wrap it up there. Thank you very much. All right.